Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with yours truly, Tom Alvarez. My guest on today's show is Alfred Savia. He's Artistic Advisor and Principal Conductor of the Indianapolis Opera. He's here to discuss the upcoming Indianapolis Opera's 50th Anniversary Legacy Opera Gala. Join me now as I go on the aisle in a conversation with Maestro Savia about the event. Welcome, Maestro. So great to see you. We were just saying before we went on that we ran into each other recently at the show that I do, Lifestyle Live at WI.
At the studios, yeah.
I was so excited to hear about the event, and we're going to talk about that. And briefly, I want to talk to you about your career. Let's start off with the event, the Indianapolis Opera's 50th Anniversary Legacy Opera Gala. Wow. Yeah. Really important and very festive. So when is it?
It is Saturday, March 22nd, 2025, with the Indianapolis Symphony at the Hilbert Circle Theater at 7:30 p.m.
Okay. And you have the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, of course, and then you have the Indianapolis Opera Chorus will also be performing, correct?
We do. And we have distinguished artists from our 50-year history, and really one or two of them go way back to almost to the beginning. We have quite an array of soloists. I think we have 15 singers who are going to be with us. You know, David Starkey and I cast this net and invited, just many of the singers, thinking, well, we'll get a handful maybe or whatever. Nearly everyone responded positively and said, absolutely. Indianapolis Opera was a major part of my career, and we want to be there for the celebration.
Oh, I heard you talking about that previously, and it didn't occur to me. But yes, of course, Indianapolis Opera, like a lot of regional companies, they give people their start or give them work when they can't get it in New York or the larger markets, right?
Absolutely. And, I think we had so many people who were at the early end of their careers and capitalized on that. And, the one I think who goes back furthest is actually Robert McFarland, who sang a La Boheme here. The really interesting connection there is that was in the early iteration of this company when it had, I don't know the whole history, but there were sort of several different strands that eventually formed Indianapolis Opera. I'm not sure when the exact date, how they determined that was the beginning, but I had been conducting in the main season, September to May, with the orchestra in Orlando, the Florida Symphony Orchestra, as its associate conductor. And then in the summer, I was working with a summer orchestra in Colorado, which is now called the National Repertory Orchestra. And my mentor from Butler University, Jackson Wiley, called me and said, well, you're being an assistant conductor for these different groups. How about if you conduct my assistant for Indianapolis Opera? I need somebody to cover rehearsals while school starts. And I looked at my schedule, and it just wedged in between. And Robert McFarland was singing Marcello in that performance. And this is one of the earliest things he did. And it's when I really learned La Boheme, because when you're in a staging rehearsal, especially when we had sort of artists in residence like that, we had many, many rehearsals. And I got to know all those singers a little bit. It was early in my professional career and early in his as well. So we're sort of kicking.
For our listeners who don't know who he is, tell us about him.
Well, he's sung in big places, including the Met, and had a very, very big career doing major roles like this, like the role in Pagliacci, which he's going to be doing the prologue for. I have to say, I wasn't part of his career after that. It was like, we were both there coming right out of the gate, and then we sort of went our own ways. But I've heard nothing but great things about him, and he's thrilled to be back. And it's funny because he texted me back or emailed me back and said, remind me when we worked together. I said, I was actually the assistant for that. He goes, now I remember. So
would you say his career was upward trajectory?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as were many people, but Jeffrey Hartman is coming back. Eric McKeever, who sang fairly recently with us, he's singing Di Provenza from Traviata. Jane Dutton, who sang early on when she was, I think, maybe in graduate school at IU, if I'm not mistaken, and Kirsten Gunnlaugsson are doing a duet. They're doing the Barcarolle from the Tales of Hoffmann. And Jane has been on the faculty at IU for a number of years and wonderful faculty member there. She does master classes for us often. And Kirsten Gunnlaugsson is a mezzo who is on the faculty at Butler University, also got some of her beginnings here. Amy Johnson, who went on to sing quite a bit at New York City Opera and other places. Tosca was one of her big roles. And Amy sang with me for many performances when I was in Evansville with the Evansville Philharmonic. She actually sang her first Mimi in Bohème, and she sang her first Cho-Cho-san and Madama Butterfly with me. And I was thrilled that Amy is going to be, she sang quite a bit with Jim Caraher in the 90s and early 2000s. And she's going to be doing Du bist der Lenz from De Volker. So we're going to have a Wagner excerpt.
And for our listeners not familiar with him, he was the principal conductor for how many seasons?
I don't remember, for many, many seasons. And Jim has been a colleague of mine for many years because I knew Jim from when I was associate conductor of the ISO in the 90s. And the orchestra back then was playing for all the operas back when the opera company played at Clues Hall. And the orchestra always spoke very highly of Jim. And I attended many performances. And then a number of years ago, speaking of Amy Johnson and Vernon Hartman, her husband, ran this festival in Italy in a small town called Mercatello sul Metauro in the Le Marche area. And Jim Caraher was on the faculty there for a number of years, and Vernon finally called me one year and said, we actually need a second conductor. And so Jim and I spent a whole summer, well, not a whole summer, but an entire month in the summer there a few years back in this wonderful little town in Italy, and coaching, sort of up and coming American singers who are in a total Italian immersion program, but also drinking a lot of Prosecco and birra and that sort of thing, hanging out. So it's wonderful to have Jim back. He's going to be conducting the Bacchanal from Samson and Delilah, which is an opera that he did with Indianapolis Opera a number of years ago. And that orchestral excerpt is a real tour de force for orchestra.
Speaking of the program was sent to me for this interview, and I am so excited because all the greatest hits. I mean, any recognizable, familiar to even those folks who are just mild opera fans will recognize many of these pieces, right?
Absolutely.
We don't want to give it all away, but why don't you highlight the program?
Well, talking about the hits that people will recognize, you just mentioned, we were just talking about the Bacchanal. You mentioned the Barcarolle from Tales of Hoffmann. Do you remember when they used to do those late night promotions for, you can buy these record sets that had all the greatest classical hits? They would always play the Barcarolle, yum, bum, 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 beat, da, from the Tales of Hoffmann. We opened the concert with Prelude to Third Act of Lohengrin, which I think people will recognize. That in the opera goes straight into the bridal chorus, which is very famous. But we open the second half with the Triumphal March from Aida, which will feature our chorus. And then that's followed by Ritorna Vincitor from Aida, which features our own Angela Brown.
We can't go on without mentioning our own Angela Brown when you talked about the guests. And of course, she made her debut in the Met in Aida. And
in Aida. Yeah, she filled in.
That's when she got noticed, and the rest.
That's when she made it really big, and I think she did the role here. I know she hadn't done Tosca here for many years, and we did it 3 seasons ago.
All that.
Spectacular. Spectacular Tosca. And speaking of which, she's doing a duet. She's doing the duet in the first act, A quegli occhi, with Jim Corneliuson, who is now the voice of the Indianapolis 500.
Really?
Yeah, he sings Back Home Again,
That's
and
interesting.
and
Okay.
Angela has sung there, I think, several years now. And
I know
Greg,
that he was an opera or had opera training or was a
oh
performer.
yeah,
I
that was
didn't know that.
his primary career. And
Okay.
then Gregory Ture, who was Cavaradossi in the Tosca that I conducted with Angela, is coming back and singing E Luceva le Stelle, another
Mhm.
well-known excerpt. Speaking of Puccini, we're going to be doing Musetta's Waltz, Quando Men Vo, with Laura Peterson. We go into a little bit of musical theater with an excerpt from The Man of La Mancha, The Impossible Dream, with Daniel Narducci.
Mhm.
And Kevin Short, who is a very, very well-known bass baritone and one of the favorites. He hasn't been with Indie Opera since I've been involved, but everybody talks about Kevin, said, we've got to get Kevin back. He is so excited to come. And we went back and forth about what he should sing. He gave me so much. But then when he said, I can sing Old Man River from Showbud, I said, that's going to bring the house down.
Oh,
So
that's good. So, did you and David sort of co-produce this? How did you do that? That's a monumental feat. And when did you start?
well, we started really about a year ago, I think. David, I think, did most of the initial outreach. I think he made a lot of phone calls, but we also sent some sort of like e-blasts out through our office. But I know he made a lot of personal contact with people. I did a lot of the follow-up. I did basically the follow-up with repertory. We sent something out. What would be the top 3 or 4 things you might be interested in doing, either an aria or a duet? Something like that. We didn't know how it was all going to shape. We thought maybe there'd be a few more trios and quartets. Really, we only have the 2 duets, the Barcaul and the duet from Tosca. Everything else is an aria. But I tried to go with things that people really wanted to play as their strengths. I mean, there are a number of people who are not performing quite as regularly as they might have at the height of their career. I want to make sure that we did things that they were comfortable with
Mhm.
and that really shaped that fit into the program. And then it was putting a jigsaw puzzle together. And I would say I mostly took over at that point and shaped it. David looked it over, gave a few suggestions, and really it came together rather quickly. We
So,
knew.
did you have a budget to hire these people, or are they all coming pro bono?
That's an interesting question, Tom. I think we had been thinking they might come pro bono, and to be honest, many of them offered to do so, but David didn't want to do that. He said, these are all people who are professionals have come. They're not being paid anywhere near the fee they would get if they were singing, Cavaradossi and Tosca or
Of
whatever. They're
course.
all getting a nominal fee, but they're all getting a fee. I think they're glad to be getting it. I think, honestly, many of them would have come regardless, but they're happy to be getting it. And I think that when you add it up, even though there are 15 of those, they're smaller fees. So I think it's not any more than we would be for casting a full-fledged opera.
Obviously,
Plus,
that says a lot about the organization, the event itself, What is this event? What does it signify for the opera? I know I have covered Indianapolis Opera for 40 years, and I've seen it through all its various, shall we say, evolutions. And
mhm.
the productions used to be huge and grand at Clues Hall, and then they went through some period and, survived that, came out of that, and, once again, they're flourishing. They went smaller, which I love, by the way.
Right.
I love these intimate productions that you've been
Mhm.
playing at the Opera Center. And where are some of the other venues that you're
Well,
playing?
we're gonna be back at
Parkington?
the Indianapolis Zoo. We're gonna be
Oh,
back in Indianapolis Zoo in the spring. We have sort of our default for the main productions has been the Tarkington at the Center for Performing Arts, or the Allied Center now, I guess it's called, in Carmel, across from the Palladium. And it's a nice size, as you said, it's a nice size theater for more intimate scaled productions, about 500 seats.
you at the Schrott as well, or did I imagine that?
We did. I think they did Camelot at the Shot.
How about the Toby?
The
The
Toby, yes. We were most recently at the Toby when we did a Little Night Music last year, and it was a absolutely ideal venue for a Little
I
Night Music.
saw that. Oh
That
my,
was our first Sondheim show, and that was the first Sondheim show I ever conducted. I'd done a lot of his music in concert, and we used local and regional talent. And it was just, Tom, when you begin a production, especially when it's not all big names coming in, even that, you never know how a cast is going to gel. But that cast was magical. Daniel
I
Narducci and
I
Heather were
reviewed
just ideal.
I reviewed it and I raved about it. It's one of my favorite
Yeah.
roles, and the cast you had was just they did an
I,
exquisite.
I ran into Sylvia McNair, who was friends with Kevin Cole, who was our piano soloist for Rhapsody in Blue this summer at Symphony on the Prairie when we did the Fourth of July concerts. And she saw me backstage and she said that was the most wonderful production. And I'm a musical theater nut, and I'm a big critic. And we were just so thrilled the way
And
that came
she
together.
did that at the IRT some time
Did
ago.
she? I didn't know that. Yeah. And, so it's an ideal venue for shows like that. I think your question about what does this signify, first of all, I think it signifies that 50 years we're still in business and we're still thriving. We've had to reinvent ourselves. As you said, I think, obviously, I was not part of Indianapolis Opera when they were playing at Clues, which I went to some of the productions. They were marvelous. They often didn't have anywhere near full houses. I mean, I
Mm.
think other opera companies, other orchestras are struggling with filling big halls, which are, in the case of sort of Hilbert Circle Theater, whatever, 1,700 seats, more or less. Clues is what, upwards of 2,000. I think even at the Met, they're not filling the house every night. So I think that it was a good game plan when the opera reorganized, and then when David became general director, to go in this new direction and to make the best productions we could for a theater that size. And, I wish the pit were not as deep as it is at the
Yeah.
Tarkington. It's a challenge to conduct because you're conducting below your knees for some of the
Ah,
orchestra and way above your head for the stage. So it's difficult to coordinate. In my opinion, the sound doesn't get out as prominently as it could from the orchestra pit, but almost every hall has its limitations. I think overall it's a great place to present music drama, as Wagner called it, which is what opera is. The Toby actually is a very comfortable pit to conduct in. I was out in the hall when we did Magic Flute there a few years ago. The sound was excellent. And we did Madama Butterfly, if you may recall, back in, I guess it was spring of 2021, while we were still in the middle of COVID, when we couldn't play at
yeah.
places like the Tarkington because you had so much spacing that in a 500-seat hall, I think we could have only had 150 people at the most, and we couldn't do it financially. That's when we came up with the idea of doing that at the zoo. It worked very well. We were going to do Carousel there, but the weather prohibited that. We wound up doing that on the Palladium stage.
You just reminded me, a thought came to my head. I forgot I attended an opera production at the Outdoor Theater during COVID. I remember those performances so soon out, and there were still people wearing a lot of masks, but people started to venture out. The energy in the room, the gratitude I felt, just the being around people, it was really special.
It really was wonderful. I can say that specifically about that butterfly. Also, for the first opera in the park we did, where we had, the bench seats and all that, but also on the grass at Garfield Park, they had painted
Yeah.
with, lime or whatever, circles where you could be in this circle, you could be in this circle, and all that. But people were just, it was cabin fever to the nth degree. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden they were so, and I can also tell you for the butterfly, because the ISO had not started playing yet. And we were able to use a lot of players from the symphony, which we normally don't use in the pit for the opera because they've got their
Yeah.
own
Yeah, we
schedule of
got
the symphony. The players of the symphony players who came out for Butterfly remind me to this day how much that meant to them, because
Mm.
that was their first venture out, and they rave about that production and how much Phil Palermo, who was associate concertmaster for that and has been concertmaster for many of our productions, talks about that.
We've got to talk about the symphony and its
Well,
significance. The Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra partnering with you on this concert. That's a
yes,
really big deal, isn't it?
it is. When piecing together a concert like this, I said to David from the get-go, let's talk to the symphony. Let's talk about collaborating with them, because we normally have someone who contracts, basically a freelance opera orchestra for us. We tend to use a lot of the same players every time that we can. So we're building more of a core, and we're building more of a sense in a sense, building a real indie opera orchestra. But in this case, I said it would be impossible to really put together a freelance orchestra. Not only that, we have 20 selections on this show because of all the different, so 20 different pieces of music that have to be put together. The Indianapolis Symphony has one of the most crackerjack library staffs in the country. And I'm working with people who are just the ultimate pros. I can't give them enough kudos because putting together a concert of this many pieces, to have the resources of the ISO is a godsend. And to have an orchestra that I know that we can put this show together in 2 rehearsals. I have a 2-hour rehearsal that Friday afternoon, and then a 2.5-hour to run through the entire repertoire with the whole cast and chorus. But I know the orchestra well enough, and the orchestra is getting better and better all the time. Every time I come back to do my concerts in the summer, I come home and say to my wife, I cannot believe not only the quality of the orchestra, but sort of the dedication and the intensity in rehearsals that they give, which is a wonderful thing to see in an orchestra like this. It is a truly world-class orchestra, and I'm thrilled to be collaborating again. And it's especially appropriate because I've had such a long history, far longer with the Indianapolis Symphony than I have had with the opera. So I feel like I'm a little bit of the glue in this equation.
June Marco was a guest on this podcast recently, and he talked about, I asked him about all the young faces. A lot of them are 30-somethings. And I asked him, we talked about, he felt it was important too, that there are also some old timers around so that they learn from each other and they grow together. And the older folks, they have institutional knowledge and they keep the culture so alive, and so it benefits. But clearly there's a new energy there that I feel when I see this orchestra with all those new faces, of vitality that's palpable.
I think that is right on the mark, and I like Maestro Miracle's comment about the combination, because it's sort of every time, this is really nice for me to be conducting the orchestra during the regular season, because I usually see them during the summer where I have an entire week with them. And it's sort of a reunion, but a reunion for me with less and less players, because more of them are retiring as years go on. But having those players still in the orchestra and having that tradition that was there in the symphony and continuing that, there's a sort of a tradition that orchestras have. I mean, there's certainly, you think of the Chicago Symphony, you think big brass. Cleveland Orchestra, you think of this incredible discipline that George Zell instilled that is still there, even though there are very, very few people, if any, left from the George Zell years. But I think that tradition of playing continues and then is transmitted to, as you said, some of the younger players who just bring this new energy. Just really wonderful to have that relationship, and looking forward to working with all of them.
You haven't mentioned, what is your official title and what your responsibilities are with the opera?
My official title is Artistic Advisor and Principal Conductor. So David and I talk together. We work together in planning seasons. We bounce ideas off each other. The way an opera company is structured, as the general director, he's oversees the whole of the company. But I'd like to think that I play a major role in that. David certainly has his very strong ideas of a direction. And sometimes I'll say, hey, what about this? Maybe we'll do this. And then, the next meeting we'll have, I'll say, okay, yeah, I like that. We're going to go that way. So I think, that comes into play, as well as some of the casting. I just got back from concert that I did with Evansville Philharmonic as part of their 90th season, where I'm conductor laureate. And I raved him.
31 seasons, correct?
I was 31 seasons there. So as I said to the audience, when Roger Collier, the current music director, and I talked together, I said, he said, it's wonderful to have you back. I said, all of a sudden I did the math. When it's 90th season, I was the music director for more than 1/3 of its existence.
Wow.
So,
but,
which is really
that says to me that you played an important role in developing music audiences in Evansville. What, 3 generations, maybe 2, at least 2?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because some of the old timers who were in the audience from when I first got the job there were there, but not so many this time around. And interesting to see a lot of new faces this time around, just as we were talking about with orchestra members. But getting back to what I do with the Indianapolis Opera, there's a role in planning seasons and casting and that sort of thing. I think there's having me in the pit for the majority of productions gives me more of a hand in developing some cohesion in the orchestra, a little tradition in the orchestra. They're used to me now. I think they come more better prepared for initial rehearsals because they know that I expect that they're just not reading parts, and they have that expectation. But as well, I work extensively with the resident artists. Every year we have generally a group in the fall, a group in the spring. Sometimes there's continuity between the two, but often a whole new crew. This time, I think we have a whole new group of 4 new singers and a new pianist in that group. And in addition to whatever small roles they might have in the productions, sometimes smaller, sometimes not so small, they're doing extensive work in the school programs that I don't really coach for, but we have these opera cabaret outreach programs. I just coached them today for that. So it's a wonderful, always a great group of new singers and a new energy. And I get re-energized working with these young singers and sort of giving them a sense of musical direction. Vocally, they're very well established. They're well set up. They may still go. Will Upham, who's our tenor, who's come back after 2 years. He's a student of Peter Volpe at IU, continuing his studies there. So he's very well grounded vocally, but this is sort of their entry into the professional realm, and I can give them the perspective of an experienced conductor who has put programs together like this and operas together, and things to look at musically. And even at times when I'm working with them, and we'll be working with musical theater, it's just coaching them in a Sondheim number that I never conducted. But I think I can, having done a little night music and other pieces, I can give them an insight into the style, that sort of thing. So that's what I do also on a daily basis when they're in residence.
Alfred, what is your estimation of Indianapolis Opera audiences? Talk about educating a community, and certainly Indianapolis Opera. Is it your experience, though, that that we have our share of fans who are quite educated, who travel, who've been to the Met and seen the best in the world? So would you say that's fair, that we have a pretty educated audience?
I think that's certainly a percentage of our audience, and we have board members who have been longtime board members who I know will say, "Oh, I just heard that. I just heard Gran Wilson sing that at the Lyric, or whoever. I just came back from the Lyric and heard that production." That tends to be more so than the Met because it's close by. I would not say that's the majority of our audience. I'd say that's a I don't know, maybe 10, 15% of the audience.
Okay.
Maybe another percentage that knows a good deal of the opera repertoire, but don't really attend performances that much out of the area.
Okay.
But quite a few young people. I think opera companies in general, and we've noticed in general, maybe a higher percentage of attendees that come to the opera than come to some of the other performing arts. And I think part of the reason for that is, as opposed to an orchestra concert, which is exciting in itself to hear a Brahms symphony or Tchaikovsky symphony for the first time. But maybe for some people who have a little less of a musical background, there's a story and there's drama to go along with what we're doing. And I think that has an appeal to a generation that has grown up on visuals. I mean, some of the great music that people have heard who are maybe in their 40s, 50s, now, even younger, has been something like Star Wars, where you're hearing great music, but you're seeing a great film.
That contradicts that old stereotype about opera as an acquired taste, that it's like the other art forms, the symphony and dance, ballet, even modern dance. Audiences, they're intimidated by it. I don't understand Italian. I don't understand this. And of course, the subtitles, must have brought people on.
I was just going to say that. I think that while they have their limitations, because sometimes you see you see the super title on the screen before it's sung, so you're getting a laugh before the laugh actually happens. Nevertheless, they're understanding the storyline. I think that was basically a game changer. Also, I think that we have to make the productions relevant. I feel like indie opera productions try to be as true to the core, that we don't have sort of I'm going to use the word Euro trash productions. And I saw an absolutely wonderfully sung Salome of Richard Strauss at the Paris Opera when I was there in late May and June. I was actually in Paris more to see Roland Garros. I went 2 days to the tennis tournament, but I did get to see Salome, and I mean, we could not have done that production because it would have, to say it wasn't even close to being R-rated. It was much closer to X-rated.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
yeah, and some of it to me, I went to a production of Turandot in Italy about 6, 7 years ago. It was so contradictory to the story and the intent of the drama that I mean, that was one of the reasons my farewell concert in Evansville, which wound up being a return concert because my farewell concert was postponed because of COVID. I wound up doing Turandot in a semi-stage production. And part of it was like, I've got to set this thing straight. Plus, I love the music. But I think that we do productions that are true to the spirit of the opera, not always to the absolute letter of every scene, but we try to make it very, very relevant and very appealing to even first-time opera goers, so that they can relate to the opera. And I think that's what we have to do, is engage people. And I think we do that successfully. I remember when I attended when I'm in the pit, I can't really see what everybody looks like out there. Sometimes there's a meet and greet afterwards. But when I was out in the hall for Magic Flute, a lot of young people at the Magic Flute. So hopefully that will continue. And this concert is sort of a pivot between our past 50 years and the next 50 years. We actually bring our concert to a close with a wonderful finale from Leonard Bernstein's Candide. And we're doing West Side Story, so there's a connection there, but it's called Make Our Garden Grow. And it's a piece that begins softly with one voice and grows and grows and grows as your garden would grow. And that is the only number on the program that is being led by our resident artists. And I think it represents now a nod to the next 50 years as we highlight those current resident artists. And then they are joined by everyone who's been singing as part of the 15 that come in, plus our chorus. Chorus is, of course, a wonderful part of the history. They're singing that. They're also singing, I mentioned the Aida, but they're also singing the wonderful Easter hymn from Cavalleria Rusticana.
Well, I'll tell you, you've really whetted my appetite. I'm very excited to see. How can people get tickets?
Well, the best thing is to go online to indieopera.org, indieopera.org. I think you can call the opera office, but there's still plenty of good seats left. This is this theater is 3 times larger than we're used to filling. So we still have some good seats. We have a big gala dinner that is completely sold out before, but there are still good seats left for the performance. So I don't know this time next week whether there will be that many seats left. So I would really encourage people to go to the website.
If they're listening to your enthusiasm and passion, I'm sure that you're going to have some people making their presence known, and when they see you out the way, And
we have a few surprises I haven't talked about, so we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, well, thank you again. It's been a
thank
pleasure.
you, Tom. Good to be with you.
It's delightful to catch up with you.
Thank you, Tom.
Good luck with the concert, and I'll see you down the road.
Thank you.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, And make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.